Welcome everybody. I'd like to welcome you to VII Insider, a new platform for conversation and dialogue about media practice and visual storytelling. We're thrilled to see so many of you here, and we think we've got a pretty special hour for you. So here in the United States, it's Martin Luther King Day. It's a public holiday when we celebrate the life of a man who died fighting against injustice, segregation, and racism. Evidently a fight that is as urgent today as it was 50 years ago. MLK's last book was titled Chaos or Community, and today we'll be talking about chaos, about photographing white supremacists and insurrectionists taking over Capitol Hill, threatening the very seat of democracy in the United States. And the irony of this timing is not lost on us. Significant moments in contemporary history are often remembered through photographs. From D-Day to 9/11, a man or a woman with a camera has summoned the courage and conviction to place themselves in the middle of a violent and fast-moving event, to make images that become part of our collective memory. These images may act as evidence and may be used to hold people accountable, and they can influence the way we remember and interpret history. Often, many of the photographers who are immersed in the middle of the violence and whose images become those of record are independent freelance photographers. And this was the case on January the 6th, and 4 of them are photographers from VII Photo Agency. All of the photographers we're talking to today have covered wars and conflict overseas. And we've got Christopher Morris, who has a long history of covering insurrection. He photographed the overthrow of President Marcos and the crowds looting Malacanan Palace in 1986. He photographed many wars, including Bosnia, Chechnya, both wars in the Gulf, and the storming of the Russian White House in 1993. He also photographed the Bush campaign and government for 9 years for Time magazine, which produced 2 books on American political life. Ron Haviv was mentored by Chris in his formative years and has also covered many wars, including Panama, Bosnia, Afghanistan, wars in the Gulf, and also photographed the storming of the Russian White House. He's produced 2 books on foreign wars and has photographed politics in America for 3 decades. Chris and Ron are both founding members of VII. Ashley's career took off covering the war in Iraq in the early 2000s, where he produced his first book. He then went on to focus on the consequences of that war, photographing migration, and his seminal study on veterans that produced a book called Bedrooms of the Fallen. And Chris Lee is the youngest member of our group. He's photographed the war against ISIS, the global migration crisis, and the protest movement in the USA with great distinction, and is part of VII's mentor program, where he's mentored by Ashley. So just to set the scene a little bit, I'd like to hand over to you, Ron, if we may. And could you tell us, how did you come to be in Washington that day? And give us share a little insight on how you chose to photograph the events in terms of style, format, etc.
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, this was a very well-known occurrence that was about to happen with the rally with the president and the march to the Capitol. So anybody that had been following the story of sort of the ending of the Trump administration, the different things that they were trying to do to increase or try to remain in power, it was pretty obvious the visual representation of that would be on the streets with the crowd. So with January 6th being named as the date, I arrived in Washington the night before, and one of the clash points in Washington between pro-Trump supporters and Black Lives Matter and Antifa is at Black Lives Matter Plaza. And there was immediately groups of people there, police and so on. Tensions were very high the night before of the main rally. And it was a good indication that the next day was going to be very, very emotional and very tinged with a lot of different things.
Ron, did you go with an assignment in mind?
I went without an assignment. I'd been working on this story to some degree throughout the year, photographing the Proud Boys, one of the different groups that support the administration, as well as Black Lives Matter protests, and Antifa, sometimes separate, sometimes when they collide together in DC, in Boston, in Portland and other places. So this was just sort of a natural for me, kind of a natural continuation of the story.
Okay. So thank you. And Ash, you know, could you tell us your journey down to Washington? You're not normally one for photographing politics, so what took you there?
I avoid politics. It's like one of my 2 rules, which is no fashion and no politics. However, the only time in the past, and then recently during the 6th, I've lifted that rule from the New York Times Magazine. So they, Amy Kellner, my editor, sent me a note and asked if I was interested to go and cover it for them. So I accepted because I figured that this would be a story that was beyond politics. And so I got done the day before, and while some of my, you know, I scouted as I always do. I the streets. I looked at the rallies that were already taking place the evening before, and then I went back to rest while Ron stayed out working, photographing clashes the night before, because I figured I had a feeling that maybe I should save my energy for the next day.
Okay, thanks. And Chris Lee, so tell us about your journey to Washington.
Yeah, I didn't go there with an assignment. I picked one up en route, actually. But for the last couple of years, I've been photographing kind of the way that Americans have been interacting and conceptualizing the military experience and everything like that. And it's kind of naturally led me to photograph kind of a very militant movements and stuff like that, militias and everything like that. And so, as Ron said, this was a very well advertised event. I thought this was particularly unique as well, because this is one of the very few times that Trump kind of did not give that very subtle dog whistle, but gave a very explicit marching, in my opinion, marching orders and instructions for his loyalists and his followers to be there, including a lot of the people that I've been photographing in this work. So I want, regardless of what was going to happen, I wanted to be there because I thought it was important.
Thanks. And Christopher, so you're down in Florida the day before. So tell us about your epic journey.
Because I'm in Florida, I'm detached from what was going on politically in the country, but I was very aware when Trump during the debate said stand by and stand down. Man, just like my heart jumps, even hearing that now, race, and then I knew it. And then the final tweet that says, okay, I got to be there on the 6th was basically when he said that stop the steal, basically come on the 6th and it'll be wild. So right away. So I reached out to clients that I know and could not get anybody interested in sending me. So on the 5th, woke up that morning, know that I'm leaving on the 5th. My original plan was to fly. Flights were cheap, 2:30 round trip, easy. Waited to talk to my wife, says, okay, I am doing this. I was all prepared, gas mask, all this kind of stuff. And the flights went up. They jumped within a half hour. They went up to like $500. So I realized also because of COVID, I'm going to drive. I've done the drive many a time, Tampa to New York. Even on September 11th, I was in Florida. I drove all the way to New York, jumped in a car. And I felt the COVID environment free. So I did, it was a 15-hour drive. And that's how I decided to go. I knew it was going to be wild, but it far exceeded my expectations. I never would have went to, people don't realize this after the drive. I don't know if you want me to get into this now, but after in a car, I left at 6 o'clock, Tampa, Florida. I arrived at the White House at 9 o'clock in the morning. I stopped 3 times for power naps, 20-minute, 45-minute naps, arrived, got out of the car, was immediately met, parked up the street in Georgetown where I was going to stay, Ubered down to the White House, and was immediately met with tens of thousands of maskless, screaming, mad, insane people that had gone mad. And that was my morning. And my big fear was not what was going to happen up the thing. I figured the police would hold the line. We're going to be there all night. My big fear was COVID. I've covered wars. I'm not a man that scares easily. And I was scared. I was scared of COVID. It's an unseen enemy that's now, you know, we see the numbers that are going on around the world. This is frightening. So that mixed with the lack of sleep and cold and that, it was a real mind warp for me.
That's a pretty epic journey. Thank you, Chris. So I think the only one of you then who arrived with an assignment is Ash. The rest of you picked them up en route or when you got there. So if we could talk a little bit now, if we bring up the context sheet, Gianna, number 58. So if we can show a little bit there, just the scene, you know, Ron, could you talk through a little bit what happened in the morning? You wake up, how do you prepare? What are you figuring? How are you going to photograph this? Talk us through some of the decisions that you made photographically and also just in terms of logistics and operationally.
Well, first, it was like you mentioned before, there was some scouting the evening before, scouted the Capitol and saw the lack of protection and was kind of amazed and was sure that they were going to be putting up fencing and perimeters and so on to stop the people from the march. So kind of really just focusing that morning on the march and being able to move around and waiting, of course, for the main show, which was, of course, the president. And it was a pretty formidable sized crowd. And the crowd was relatively calm, but fever pitch building as they got closer to the president, and different politicians came out and tried to sort of rally them and get them pumped up and talking a militaristic talk that we've heard on the news, the different speeches. And by the time the president came out, the people were enraptured. It was really one of these kind of remarkable political events where there was just kind of this amazing look on their faces as they listened to their president speak. And of course, as he was talking about how their election was being stolen, how their country was being stolen, and also every few moments mentioning how this was all the fault of the media. The energy changed a little bit in the crowd. Grumblings that didn't exist maybe 20 minutes before, at least towards me when I was walking around with the camera, the tension started to raise started to rise a little bit against us. But it was a pretty remarkable scene. And then of course, when he said, let's go to the Capitol, and then even actually said he was going to go with them, the people were pretty amazed and pretty excited. And I think that the combination of his speech along with Giuliani's and the other congressmen set the stage for this, along with, of course, the previous week where he said, go wild. And this is really an incredible showing of what rhetoric can do in these situations.
So you moved at that point, right? You decided to move up to the Capitol.
I decided I didn't want to walk with them. I wanted to kind of get there ahead of time. And as I was driving up there, already had been a few thousand people that had left while Trump was speaking. And I was getting tweets that some flashbangs had started and there was some confrontation with the Capitol Police. And so I headed towards the inauguration stand side of the Capitol. And when I arrived, they were already basically trying to break into the building.
Right. Now, Christopher, you also, left at this point. Could you talk us through that a little bit?
Just, I realized I needed to, my whole plan, I knew it was the Capitol. I knew that was where we were all headed. I had to quickly get back and get proper clothes on. I was frozen. When I had raced out of the cars, I didn't put on any kind of warm clothing. And I ended up, basically on a ladder in this crowd for 3 hours. So once I heard that call, what they were saying, the march up, I immediately kind of headed up to do some shots closer under the monument, and then quickly kind of raced down and then tried to hail an Uber to get back to my car to get my helmet and gas mask. In the Uber car, the minute I was in the Uber car and got picked up, it took like 20 minutes for the Uber to reach me near the White House. On the radio, they were already saying that they're attacking the fence line at the White House, that there's already crowds. And I mean, I've just left the event and I'm like, oh my God, I got to hurry up. So by the time I got back to my car, get my tights, shoved in a croissant, and went to get in my car to head back down. The Google Maps, it was interesting at one time, whenever you would put in US Capitol or any of that, the Google map would go blank. was really worried. It was almost like I felt like, wow, the government's jamming when you put in address searches. It was this weird thing. But then all of a sudden I saw the red on all the traffic lines and I realized there's no way I can go by car. I hadn't prepared to have a bicycle. My whole plan originally was to have a bicycle, to rent a bicycle. So I figured, screw this, I've got to head northeast. So I drove up trying to get to Union Station heading north, but I was immediately hit with a lot of traffic. So I had to make, you know, I'm in a black car with North Carolina plates and not easy to fight traffic, but I basically went like a fire engine. I went over yellow lines, through red lights. Don't really like talking about it, but it's like what I could hear on the radio live, that they were, you know, basically storming the Capitol, and I'm in my car racing to get there. You know, I take the seatbelt, you put the seatbelt behind you because you know you got to get out. It's kind of, you think, the odd thing to do, but then I kind of made the approach for, I parked behind the Supreme Court. Even when I was parking by the Supreme Court, I was met by a group that started screaming at me and taunting me because I looked like Antifa. And I realized, fuck, here we go. I got to go into this. I got kind of pushed over by a coffee. I went to get a coffee and there were a bunch of Trump supporters in a coffee shop just close over by the Dirksen, by where I parked. And they kind of pinned me down and threatened me, stuff like that.
Hold that thought for a moment, because I want to get to that situation a little bit later. If we could just roll back a bit. I know you went.
But that's kind of where I end up. I ended up on the north side of the thing because I knew it also was I know the Capitol well. I worked there for 10 years. The west side is a huge vertical thing, and it's always bothered me. I've done inaugurations. That whole inauguration stands, I heard it on the radio. I wanted to go to the east side because the east side, you're on the steps. It's right there. That's the main doors. It's everybody uses, the senators. It's visually that's there. And I was not expecting what I saw when I had arrived. And I don't know if we want to continue or go on.
No, we'll go into that in a little bit. One of the things I want to get into, Chris, I know you went there to photograph with this new system, LiDAR. Yes. And that was one of the intentions you had, and you were thinking about that as you were driving up from Florida.
I had an iPhone Christmas gift, worked on Christmas. I says, oh my God, I downloaded this app because I figured out how to use it and did it Christmas. I'll dry up. All I had in my mind was this LiDAR thing. I was fascinated. It was like when daguerreotype went to film. It's magic. It's like if you think the magic of what we do as photographers, we're capturing time, we're stopping time, we're framing an event. That's all that photography is. And the fact that it's just a step in evolution. We went from daguerreotype to the magic of when film, sheet film. Oh my God, they got sheet film. That was magical. And all of a sudden we went from film to digital, and all of a sudden I wake up Christmas morning and we all have these LiDAR scanners. So because of the overwhelming of the situation, I forgot about the iPhone. I was doing video, slow motion video. I was trying to do photos, and I was also trying to survive for my life. And people don't realize that. Every one of us had unique situation. I've covered the world. I've been beaten. I've been arrested. I've been thrown in jail. I've done coups. I've done it all in that regard. I was afraid for my life on the east side of those steps. There were a good 45 minutes that I basically had to fight for my life and stand my ground. And to see that in my own country, extremely frightening. Extremely. We'll
get to that, Chris. Just hold that thought there, man. We'll get to that. I want to get back now, if we can, to Chris and Ash, who are back next to Trump and sort of moving up towards the Capitol. So Ash, if we can get to you, I know you and Chris are on a WhatsApp group, you're communicating. So what was the process? How did you sort of figure out where to move? Were you with Chris at the time? Were you guys together? Were you independent? And just go through that thought process a little bit. And if I can ask you to talk about image number 7, which is a sort of Les Miserables image for me, a very powerful image of the guy waving the Gadsden flag down there. But if we can, talk us through the process of moving from the speech up to the Capitol and when the violence began.
Oh, I saw that Chris, I saw Chris obviously photographing in the crowds, but I saw that most of my colleagues went ahead to the Capitol, and I stayed behind, actually on the mall, because I was still very unhappy with the images that I had made of the rally itself. And I felt like I was going to screw up the entire assignment because I didn't have any pictures that I was happy with at that point. And so I found this bottleneck on Constitution where the crowds were streaming towards the Capitol. And I think that's the DOJ on the left-hand side. And I saw this man with a flag. So I climbed up on top of a drinking fountain and started photographing that and photographing these masses of crowds leaving, to the point that the crowds had thinned out because almost everybody had left. And it was at that point that I think Chris had found a moment to pause in between the malaise between what was taking place outside the Capitol. And he sent me a message which said, get to the, Ashley should get to the Capitol. And when Chris Lee says that, you get your ass to the Capitol. There's people who send you messages and it's like, don't worry about it, it's not that big a deal. But when Chris sends it, you know it's serious. So I ran, because it was the only way I could get there, as quick as I could. And instead of taking Constitution, like I ran north and then down Pennsylvania because I knew the crowds would be thinner. So I got there very, very quickly after making the image of this guy with a flag that reminded me, I was sort of making a nod at that amazing image of the Reichstag with this picture, with that federal architecture, thinking that this was the best I was going to get all day. Like, honestly, my judgment is so thrown right now for what we're experiencing. I didn't think anything more than this was going to happen, and how wrong I was.
Chris, if we can go to you, you took this sort of very quiet image number 2, the Confederate flag with all the US flags in the background. You move up from Trump's speech, and then bang, you immediately get into image number 8. This guy gets hammered by tear gas. At what sort of point? I mean, these are extraordinary images. I think you did an incredible job. You really kicked ass. But at what point, were you aware that things were just really shifting, the mood was changing, and how did you respond to that in terms of not only your practice, how to photograph, but just in terms of how to behave, how to move, how to protect yourself, as well as being able to produce the images?
So the thing that I noticed, and maybe because I wasn't in the middle of the crowd, and I was kind of working a little bit on the perimeter of the rally during Trump's speech, I noticed that a lot of people started drifting away, at least on the edges, on the perimeter towards the Capitol. And this was actually in the middle of Trump's speech. I believe it was maybe like almost 30 seconds after he said, we're going to march to the Capitol during his speech, that I see people start kind of like trailing off. And so since I was there for a particular reason to kind of follow his loyalists rather than photograph a bunch of people listening to Trump, I figured, hey, why not? Like, let's go over there. And it seemed quiet at first, and as soon as I started getting towards the front steps of the Capitol, did I see just tensions rising and people getting a lot more excited, a lot more aggressive, and just people piling up on these very flimsy metal barricades that they had put up around the steps of the Capitol. And
can we move to number 11, Jana, image number 11? So talk us through this, Chris. You've gone from a sort of relatively quiet scene. You're a member of fake news, right? You're the sort of enemy of this particular group of people, or they're the very best. They're very suspicious of you. So did how did that affect the way that you worked? Do you immerse yourself in and wait for shit to happen and then withdraw, or how do you operate? How do you gauge the crowd? How do you sense the crowd?
Yeah, the things that I've kind of picked up over the years, and the things that people like Ash, Ron, and Chris have kind of taught me anecdotally, is that you kind of figure out where the energy is in the crowd. You figure out where, not necessarily where the loudest is, or like where people are shouting the loudest, but where kind of the concentration of like the energy is moving and like people progressing as far as what their goal is. And I think Ron, I had run into Ron underneath the scaffolding at this point, but I noticed at least that you know, the cops that they were, the Capitol Police that they were up against, they only had batons. They didn't have necessarily shields or these crowd dispersal techniques or instruments. And so I figured that if they're gonna make any kind of headway through the cops, it's gonna be probably over here where it's the weakest, and it kind of does bottleneck at this point. And you just kind of have to fight that feeling of, is the picture somewhere else? Am I in the right spot? Am I totally blowing it? And just kind of stay there and just see how the situation unfolds.
Thank you. Ron, if we can go over to you. So you know, you guys, you've now sort of come out of your car, you're making your way over to the Capitol, you're sort of immersed into a whole new environment. Can you just talk us through that a little bit? Sort of, how do you read the crowd? How do you pick up? How do you make the decisions where to go, what to photograph? Because, you know, the crowd has surrounded the Capitol, right? And so how do you choose where you go? Or talk us through that process a little bit, please.
Sure. I mean, this is now entering, at least for myself, the world of hindsight and regret of decisions made and decisions not made. And so when I arrived, I saw them moving towards the scaffolding. There was already clashes, fighting, tear gas, and so on. And I thought, oh my God, it looks pretty obvious that they're going to get into the building. So I very quickly moved to the scaffolding, which is one of the ways they were getting to be able to get to the windows and doors. And by doing that, I wound up being one of the first people inside the building, but at the same time, I lost all the photographs of the perspective of overall, the wide shots and so on, because I immediately went inside and became very intimate with them. So after this photograph here, I was photographing them in the scaffolding and then kind of moving around. One of the things also, the scaffolding, was that I had no idea whether the scaffolding was finished or not. Like, the guys, construction guys, left the scaffolding and said nobody should go on the scaffolding until we were done screwing everything in. So I was also waiting for the scaffolding to collapse because, of course, and plus it wasn't made for people to be climbing like that inside. So I was trying to get through the scaffolding and to the entrances as soon as possible. And it was, for myself, I had my experience interacting with these guys was the opposite of what Chris and other of our colleagues experienced. Nobody really spoke to me. I was able to kind of move pretty seamlessly throughout, which was great. And the next worry, of course, was that when you are with a group, with a mob attacking a building, and there are defenders inside the building, the question is, will the defenders start shooting from inside the building, which is a normal defense tactic. Something that I've seen. Chris and I have been together in Russia and other places where all of a sudden gunfire comes flying out of windows, irregardless whoever's in front of the window. And so you had to kind of judge and make that decision. Are the Capitol Police or whoever's inside the building going to open fire or not? And to me, making an educated guess, and of course being lucky, but understanding that at one point it seemed quite obvious that was not going to be their defense. Therefore, going into the building was more going to be hand to hand, some of this weak tear gas, flash bombs, and so on. And of course, the biggest fear, of course, being COVID. So the danger of that kind of thing of being shot minimized very, very quickly for me.
Thank you, Ash. If we can go to you, just had a question here which somebody's raised, which I want to ask. Sort of, how do you deal with this sort of perceived sort of loss of neutrality? So rather than being a neutral observer, you know, the demonstrators here clearly see you as the enemy, and sort of what impact does that have on the choices you make as a photographer, how to operate? For Ash, question for you.
I don't think I've been regarded as a neutral observer at any point in my career since I was working, you know, as a professional photographer at 18, and I'm 42 years old now. I've always been regarded as a cockroach, as the enemy, as some sort of like some sort of object to definitely get far away from the lines of being able to see what is taking place. And that has always been for one underlying clear reason, which is people don't want photographers around because we provide evidence of what actually takes place. And when people are doing shit like this, they don't want us around to see it. So I don't think that Wednesday, January the 6th, 2021 was any different from most days of working in my life as a photographer.
Yeah, I'm sure it's the same for everyone. So when you're going up the steps, the mood has changed. You move from the speech, you're entering. You've got this crowd at the Capitol. It's chaos. It's pandemonium. You've got several mates around. Sort of what are you anticipating at this point, Ash? You had low expectations of this day, right? So things are now ramping up.
I think I'm with Ron on this. Like, this is when it all starts to turn into a regret as far as decisions made. However, that was one decision I took a chance with, and I had very clear discussions with my editors at the magazine that I would go, but I would be taking risks in my coverage that might mean we would miss other pictures, and my editors were comfortable with that. So when I arrived on the steps, or to the edge of the steps on the Capitol, I could see that there were police on the stairs. I could see that the protesters, the loyalists, were making their way up the stairs, and I could see people climbing the wall. And I saw immediately that that was an amazing picture of people climbing the wall. But if I focused on shooting that and making a great picture of that, I would miss the moment that they may breach the building. So I climbed the wall as I saw the police retreating up the steps, and took that chance, just the same as Ron says. Like, I realized I was giving up what I saw as very important and very powerful pictures, but I have seen pictures of protesters outside the United States Capitol. And what I haven't seen is pictures of protesters inside the United States Capitol. And I felt that risk of maybe going inside and photographing people inside was worth it.
Key. So how did you get inside? Because if we can have image number 18 now, we have this incredible photograph of Eugene Goodman. I know three of you photographed him, but I want to highlight this one, Ash. I think this is an extraordinary moment, actually. Composition is just perfect. And this guy has this incredible presence. Who would want to be him? So could you just talk us through the process of physically getting in the building? How did that happen? Where you sort of just... Go ahead.
I got to the terrace of the Capitol, which overlooks the mall, and I turned around very quickly as I was climbing these steps because everybody behind me was saying, "Don't stop, don't stop." All of these protesters, I guessed, and they just kept screaming, "Don't stop," as everybody was climbing the steps. This huge, like, thick mob of people. So I stopped and turned around. I took a picture, and then I got onto the terrace, and I saw Chris Lee over close to what looked like a doorway. So I joined Chris, and the protesters were using shields and bats to smash windows. And once they got through the windows, they popped a door that they're also smashing, and I walked through that. And I wasn't sure at that point if I was by myself or not. But at one point on the way in, I turned around to take a picture of all the crowds as they immediately after they entered the building. And in the crowd, actually, in this picture that I really like of that moment, because it's just chaos, is Ron and Chris in my picture. And so knowing that they were right there and we were all together gave me a little bit of, gave me a lot of confidence, because we look after one another in these situations. But then the crowd, like, they moved quickly through the corridors and they were stopped by this officer. And so we were with the first 20 or so people as they were moving through. So I started taking photographs, and you have to raise your camera above your head to get through the crowd. And I immediately thought that somebody was going to be shot, whether it was Chris Lee, whether it was Ron, whether it was one of the protesters, whether it was me, because the officer was very forceful. He was very clear that nobody was to be moving through there, and they kept moving towards him and moving back and threatening him, and he kept touching his gun. But the most amazing part of this moment that I felt was the restraint that he showed, because he didn't draw his gun. Instead, he kept shouting and threatening. And I think that for a lone law enforcement personnel to stand against what was very clearly a major invasion of the Capitol, it was one of the most courageous things I've ever seen, especially of that day. And there were very few courageous moments of that day that anybody can be proud of, but this was one of them.
Yes, I think we'd all agree. If we can, Gianna, go to the context sheet of number 60. And, you know, Ron, if I can go to you here. So there's been a lot of talk about, you know, the organization, the structure of the protest, a lot of speculation on you know, how it was planned in advance, etc. Could you just tell us a little bit, Chris Lee, I'll come to you as well on this. So what was your experience of that? What did you see? Did you see sort of organization inside or not?
In terms of like a hierarchy, in terms of the command structure running through the crowd, I would be hesitant to say there's anything like that. I think maybe definitely small groups of people, different militias were together. They had radios. Didn't really see anybody communicating on radios, but I think they were working in concert. But I think what kind of the crowd would gather together at a doorway, and they would organize themselves to push through, hold the line if the police were coming towards them. And they would organize that. I think in terms of their ideas and what they would do once they were inside was very mixed. And you see that in the reactions and what happened once they were inside. Many of them became immediate tourists. Some of them were just astounded at where they were. Other people were looking to explain or shout or scream at senators and asking directions to Schumer's office or Pelosi's office. Whether or not they wanted to hurt them, harm them, I think we'll find more out. But I think those were the people in the minority. A number of people went up to the officers once they got in the building, asked where the bathroom was, and the officers would direct them to the bathroom. So it was this really kind of very surreal mix of people. And then of course you adding, you know, the shaman and the panda and all these other kind of odd, surreal situations. I mean,
I'm really struck by that, actually. On the one hand, you guys have photographed this sort of incredible violence. I mean, really real violence. And then we get into a theater of the absurd, the sort of carnival atmosphere. So, you know, your image of the shaman, I know Ash has one also, but if we can just focus on that for a moment. And then you saw the image of Angeli, and then the image of Mostovsky, both men dressed in skins in the Capitol. Can you just talk us through these guys and, you know, photographing them? Did you stay with them? Did you follow them? Did you just pass by them? Talk us through a little bit about the practice.
Well, for myself, when I'm looking through all the film, I'm actually realized that I was standing next to the shaman outside, kind of waiting for ability to kind of go through the scaffolding, and then wound up following him in this group where I think can be based on the different investigations that have gone on. They're probably one of the first groups to get inside, and where they are is the second floor where Mike Pence was just 1 minute before. So this could have been an incredibly dangerous situation that luckily, because Goodman delayed them so much, they were able to get Pence out of there. And for me, for my particular version of the most photographed man of the day, here, I think it's just, for me, it's one of like, he's just in awe of where he is and surprised and can't really actually believe where they are. And I think that, was a good representation of many, for many of them. And the other guy, I think, is just a very sad character who, unfortunately for him, saw that there was a box of flak jackets and shields outside the Capitol, and he decided to take them, and is now going to be, his charges are going to be much more serious because of what he did. But this guy was just a very harmless, sort of join the crowd kind of guy in my opinion, and just very surreal. Obviously, sitting there next to a Hubert Humphrey bust and a painting, just kind of a very odd experience. And he kind of actually, there's shots of him in this chair, and then there's a couch across the hall. He sat in that one. He basically sat down through almost all the confrontation. It was kind of funny.
Thank you, Chris. If I can ask you, we've got a question here from one of the subscribers would like to know if you felt in heightened danger because of your ethnicity, because this is a racist, white supremacist crowd. And you and I know have discussed that they were criticizing you, got into a lot of criticism, and you were focused on because you were wearing a mask, and most of them weren't. Could you talk us through a little bit about managing, your way through this crowd? These guys have been photographing this stuff for 20, 30 years, and for you, this is not a totally new experience, but it's a relatively new and probably the most dramatic of all of your experiences photographing crowd violence.
Yeah, I think that being a person of color is always a risk, and it's always like a thing that's very in the front of my mind and in front of my thinking, regardless of where I go. And although I will say I think that it's accurate to say the majority of us, maybe except for Ron, is like the exception to the rule, but the majority of us have gotten have been given a hard time for being press there. I remember having interactions with people coming up to me saying, we know that you're not one of us because you're actually taking the virus seriously. I had like a KN95 mask on, and even if I didn't have a press badge out, which sometimes I did, it was they would point me out as an outsider, and whether that is a combination of me not being white or me having what they consider a real mask, who's to say? But it is something that it has been pointed out to me a couple times, and when they did kind of rough me up a little bit, they did make it a point in all the chaos to try to pull my mask off of my face, which I found was really interesting. You would think that if you're trying to rough someone up, that would, like a mask would kind of not be the thing that you would concentrate on, right? So
yeah. Ash, if we can move to you, if you talk about picture number 28. So just talk a little bit here about, your process as a photographer, as a storyteller, when you're moving through the Capitol. What do you choose to include in your pictures? What are you trying to show here? How are you photographing? Oh, Ash is on mute.
Sorry, I just jumped up out of my chair, and I've been trying to call people because the Capitol just got evacuated.
If there's a fire, it's a fire.
Right. It seems like it's fine, but how fucking tense this place is right now. God damn it. So when I'm shooting in any sort of situation, and particularly as I get more informed as a photographer, I remember Michelle McNally talking about this amazing picture of the Pope after he died, and there were crowds taking a picture of the Pope being carried through St. Peter's Square, and there were all of the pilgrims there to see his body on the way to be buried, and they were taking pictures on their cell phone. And I remember saying to Michelle McNally, who was then the DOP at the New York Times, "It's a great picture, but I don't like the phones." And she's like, "Are you crazy? That's what makes the image. That's what roots it in now." And so since then, I've always tried to include as much context as I possibly can in images, because I realize first and foremost, I'm documenting history. So what are the elements in the picture that put us in the year or the day or the period that we're in now? So when I was shooting this photograph of the loyalists moving through the Capitol, and they had put this Trump hat on this bust of George Washington, I was looking for the visual elements that would actually include that. So you can see that there's a phone. You can see obviously the Trump hat. You can see the Trump flag on the right-hand side. And in addition to that, in addition to the protesters and the high sort of emotions that they're showing, you can also see the camera on the base of the stairs. That wasn't there when this building was built, and that probably wasn't there as short as like 20, 30 years ago. So when I'm making these pictures, often my stuff is much messier than I think other photographers it may be, but I'm trying to include those visual elements that will always root this image in today. And I wanted to say about this picture as well, and actually a lot of this experience, as people were moving through this building, and there was very little, you know, with very rare exceptions, there was very little pushback from authorities, if authorities were even visible at all. The sense of chaos and the sense of wonder moving into a building like this, the only thing that I could liken it to was, and I hate to say this, but was Iraqis as they stormed Saddam's palaces. And it reminded me so much of it. And when I found this staircase, all I could think of was this picture that I made back in 2003 in one of Saddam's palaces, this picture that really sort of set off my career in many ways. I mean, in fact, when I was introduced to a lot of the VII photographers, I was introduced as the guy who took the picture of the slider. So it was a visual cue that I was recognizing from my own career, which was pretty weird. But since I took the picture and it was published, I've gotten a bunch of notes from people that have said the same thing. It reminds them of that picture from Iraq. And I'm not likening the two situations as news scenarios, but just as experiences that I felt and scenes that I witnessed, it was very similar.
Thank you. So Ron, Ash is talking there about sort of, you know, image construct choices. I know we've had a conversation where you were discussing finding images when you went back to your hotel room in the evening that you can't remember taking. I think this is one of them here on the screen. Could you talk us a little bit about your practice and what you were thinking of as you were moving through the building? Because the guys have described to me in conversations before this that you were incredibly calm and moving around the building very, very elegantly and sort of just slowly moving into a situation and moving out. But could you talk us through a little bit about your process, please?
Well, I think all of us were trying to really understand what was going on. I think one of the problems in this building was, at least certainly for me, was I wasn't familiar enough with it, and I didn't know it's a labyrinth of hallways. And it was quite interesting that each hallway you would go down, there'd be something different happening. There would be protesters moving through, police watching them, no police, confrontations, or a panda standing there. It's just kind of a little bit of a surprise. In fact, actually, I really didn't even recall photographing this panda until I saw the image later. And this is, again, very indicative of many of the situations that we've seen here and in other places, that you have these surreal moments amidst all of this violence. When outside, they're yelling at, kill the guy with his own gun. There's a guy with a panda and a liberty flag standing calmly amongst riot police. And so I think I don't think any of us did it, any photographer did it in terms of capturing the entire thing, but our goal always is to try to capture the mood of what's happening through the events, through composition, through details, through the emotion of whether you're using color or black and white, and person trying to say something specific with their work. I mean, it was obvious with the crowd, even if they hadn't gotten in, it was already a historic day. And then of course, once they got in, I think it was pretty obvious to all of us what we were witnessing was incredible. And the question was, what was going to happen next? It was always like, what's happening next? How can we be careful? How can we survive and continue to document this? And of course, I think for me, and I'm pretty sure that at least Chris and I had this conversation, when are they going to turn on the media? Like, at what point are they going to recognize really on a larger group that we're there documenting this and we are their enemy? And that's what happened towards the end of the day.
Yeah, I have to say, I don't think I've ever, witnessed an insurrection or a sort of riot and demonstration where people have dressed up as chickens and pandas, in bearskins with horns coming out of their heads. But we shouldn't overlook the level of violence. And what I'd like to do now, Christopher, is bring you back in, because you had a very different journey. The guys are in the Capitol. At some point, law enforcement start to get control. And we have some images up here on the screen on the contact sheet. I'd like to talk to you about in a moment. But could you just tell us? Could we left you in your car. You were going to get your long johns at a croissant, and then you were tearing through Washington.
I parked behind the Supreme Court. I knew that
Yep.
there were crowds there. I figured it was easy. I'll have access. I made another tactical error. I didn't let anybody know I was going. I didn't tell Seven. I didn't tell Ron. I didn't get threaded into the group. I wanted the freedom of being, actually it was quite liberating knowing I wasn't on an assignment. I had this, because I had all this creative thought processes I wanted to take in, but that was a huge mistake, because I would have understand what the severity on the front and things, because I was in this, you end up in a tunnel vision. You can only see what's next to you. You only have your perception. And once I was out of the vehicle, I lost radio, any kind of knowledge of the live event that I was listening in the car ride. Just kind of approaching, I stopped to make a few kind of like happy snaps after I got my coffee, and was kind of accosted for being Antifa, and then realizing I'm not Antifa, I'm just enemy of the people. I got a little nervous because the people around me, there were a lot of like organized, like, I don't want to say military type, but they had the physique. I don't know, ex-law enforcement and stuff. Just whatever. There were different gangs on that east side. I saw, first 70 meters I'm approaching, I see somebody swinging, looks like a long pole. It wasn't a flagpole, but it was like, it looked like a pipe. And on the other end of that pipe was a TV cameraman running. And I'm seeing this from far away. It's like a 200mm shot that I need, which I definitely don't have. I just think, oh my God, they're attacking this cameraman, and he gets hit, and the camera goes off his shoulder and he falls down, and the guy sets on him and beats him, and the guy gets up and runs, leaves his camera. It looks like a network cameraman. So immediately I'm like, oh fuck, I can't go that way. So I turn that way and I look into the crowd, and again, now off maybe still another 50 meters away, I see this crowd like fighting, and out comes running a photographer wearing a gas mask and helmet. So immediately I carry a pouch. I have this pouch on me I wear over my neck because I can drop my phone in there. And on this pouch, I have my ID, but I remember I flipped it. I realized, fuck, I can't be media, beating the media out. And I don't see anybody. I realize I'm in Washington, D.C., the biggest story imaginable. I've got maybe 50 personal friends that work there in Washington, and I don't see anybody. I don't see anybody. I don't see Ron. I don't see AP. I don't see CNN. I mean, I enter in an area that's just with protesters. In my vision, they're standing on top of a SWAT vehicle. At this incident, I've already been attacked. Before I reached the SWAT vehicle, I had already been attacked 3 times. First in the coffee shop. And when I say attacked, the initial is pushing, shoving, some kicking, pulling, but very frightening. Maskless, screaming. Antifa, oh, you're not anti. They use the word dox. He's here to dox us. I didn't even know what dox meant. I said, what do you mean dox? I later Googled it and found out what that was. But the fact that you have 2 choices. You're either an Antifa communist or you're the enemy of the people. And one of them, when I tried to climb up on the SWAT vehicle, and some guy grabbed my pant legs and pulled me to the ground, and I fell down on the ground, and the crowd kind of fed off that energy of this Antifa agitator, and started kicking me and pulling me, and I stood up and I ripped off my mask out of COVID fear, and I screamed a wild rage. I basically became a madman, a mad, screaming old man. And I basically looked up and said, I work for Time magazine. I document history. I'm not fake news. This is reality. You've just stormed and taken over the US government. This is historic. Leave me alone. And that's what I basically did 5 times. And even when I was up on the vehicle, so you deal with one pack and you got another pack that see you. And they have been on that side, they just brought out a dead woman out the side, and they went crazy. That's when they unleashed on the media. And so basically you had this game. I got down and I saw on the side where there was a group that were still trying to go through a window that was underneath the stair area and the thing that were breaking in on the congressional side on the east side. But these guys were in, again, they had like some kind of uniform. They had some black American flags, which I had discovered earlier at the rally when I filmed that, and I asked what that meant, and they said it's a flag of war. You know, when you never see a black American flag. I've never seen that in my life. And these guys had patches on it, and they pushed me up against the wall and pinned me down and did not want to let me photograph. And they went in, and I had known that photographers were inside. I did not know Ron was in. My mental capacity, because I worked there for 10 years, I know those halls like the back of my hands, and they are a labyrinth. There are a lot of small stairs to move around, hallways, basements. My vision working there 10 years, and it's like going into the Vatican. You can't touch the walls. You can't put your ladder on the floor without felt under it. They take that, it's like pristine, that place. And my thought was, these guys are getting arrested. My thought that everybody going through that window is being met by SWAT teams coming out of hallways and handcuffing and putting down and just arresting everybody. This is my mental capacity. I had an expired, what ID I had in my pouch was an expired Capitol Hill pass. It was 2 years old. But my mental capacity of knowing that they've shot Buddy was that if I go through that window, I'm either going to get arrested for entering a federal property. Even though I'm media, I had that fear. Ron and I faced that in Moscow. We both had an opportunity to enter the palace, the White House in Moscow. And I didn't then because I didn't want to lose my film. I didn't want to go through that window because I thought 100% I'm going to get arrested. And if I wasn't arrested, I was going to have another incident where I'd be cornered and beaten to a pulp because I'm Antifa. So I stayed outside and I tried to document. I wasn't trying to document for tomorrow's news. I was trying to document for history. And it's like Ron said, you have to try to take in, and even Ashley, the visual element of try to illustrate this grand thing. And what's amazing about Severin's coverage, it's pretty phenomenal how we ended up covering it. And I'm extremely proud of the team. And I wanted to mention this earlier. If you look at the screen of the photographers that are here, you have myself. I'm extremely experienced, and everybody knows that. Ashley Gilbertson, just look at Fallujah, survived Fallujah. Breach a building with the guy in front of you who dies. And you're dealing with experienced people. Look at Ron, Belenya, Vukovar, just his whole career. And then you have Chris Lee starting out a young key. He still has the name Minty on his credit. You know, his work is timeless. I'm very proud of that. Real quick, I'll end this. From my perspective, the guy, a Trump supporter, came out with a bullhorn, basically yelling they're surrendering, and out walks that cop leading these dejected riot police. From my perspective, so for 45 minutes back here, no police. There's nobody. In my mind, I'm right across from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's in the background. Where's the army? I think these people are going to be, they're going to get overrun. I heard the explosions out front. I know what's going down front, but there's no photographers here. There must be 500 on the front side of the building. I'm staying here just because something's going to happen. So that's kind of what led me for my day. But like each one of us on the screen, we all have second guess. We all didn't sleep those nights thinking should have, would have, done of, whatever. I should have been up here a few days ahead, all prepped, had meetings with Ron. We would have been coordinated. I mean, I had a ladder with a bicycle lock that was in the crowd. So after the event, I could lock up my, ladder. We know how to do this. You had 4 extremely competent and professional photographers that know how to document this history. And I'll just kind of let it go by that. But I've very few things have shaken me to where I can weep. And that event that day, I can weep. I didn't weep in Grozny. I didn't weep about watching different revolutions in different countries. There's a couple incidents in Sarajevo that's, I guess it's PTSD that can cause me to have tears. And that event and what I encountered on the East Side puts me in that state of mind, because I feared for my life. I feared for my life in my own country. I had to defend myself that I'm an American. I'm not fake news, and I'm not the enemy of the people. A very interesting thing happened to me last night, or the night before last, near the Union Square. I get out of the car in my attire. I've got my pouch with my thing. I approach a checkpoint. They're searching the trunks of vehicles. These are hooded men in balaclavas on civilian streets in America. Civilian streets in America, searching cars at night. Some officer sees me coming and he's like, whoa, 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 who are you? Back up, back up. He stops me from 10 feet away. He looks at me, he says, why are you dressed like that? You're dressed like the enemy of the people. And he didn't say enemy of the people. He said, you're dressed like the enemy. And I said, the enemy, I says, look at you, you're in the National Guard. You have a job. Look how you're dressed. Look where you are. Look at these houses. You're in camouflage with your face covered next to buildings, carrying a gun, and you're calling me the enemy of the people. I've been wearing these clothes for 30 years. You know, I have a camera and I'm here, I'm a journalist. It's, and he said to me, he says, you're part of the problem. The optics that you guys take with your images shows, look at this. He says, you know what this is to the rest of America? Do you know what this is to my friends? This is an army that there is to protect an illegal president. And this is a lieutenant in the National Guard from Pennsylvania. So who the heck are these people, the National Guard, where 70% of them, I guarantee you, are Trump supporters and rabid Trump supporters. And the US government has just flooded the whole city with these people on the streets. You know, the Secret Service is all freaked out. They're gonna have an inauguration up there. You know, you walk around up there. I have a pass. I can go into the Capitol buildings. I can move around. They're everywhere. There's snipers, but they're National Guard. These are not regular army. You know, so I'm sorry I'm yelling, but what the heck is going wrong with them? What the heck is going wrong with America? It's like, here we are. We all know. That's why Ron and Ash and Chris and I, we all knew, man, we got to be in Washington. You know, the country is on the brink. You know, sorry about that.
No, thanks, Chris. It's fantastic. We've got a whole load of questions here I want to get to, but before we do, Chris, if you could set up, he's gone. When you get back, if you could set up your LiDAR, as I know all of you you've moved on from this story. You know, you that was last week. You're now focused on what comes next. So, you know, Ash, Ron, you're both in DC, I think, at the moment, right? What could you tell us what you're preparing to do? Chris, if you could line up LiDAR, we're going to, Christopher, if you could line up LiDAR, we're going to get to you in a moment. Just want to get over to Ash and Ron to talk about what comes next in their coverage. Ash, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. I am here trying to focus on the militarization of the city in the preparation of and then the inauguration itself. So we'll see how I go with that, because it's a bit of an uphill battle.
And Ron, thank you. Ron, what are you up to?
It's quite similar, I think, you know, where this is, well, it's kind of amazing, you know, there have been National Guard on the streets of Washington for the last 3 inaugurations, but they were there pretty much as traffic cops and backup and so on. And here they are on the streets with an order or the ability to kill at will. They have lethal force. Lethal force has been allowed. So it's a huge difference. They are defending the Capitol. I'm not sure I totally agree with what Christopher was saying, but it is an occupation / defense / we'll see what happens moment. It's a historical moment. An inauguration hasn't been in this sort of mentality or this emotion since Lincoln, and I think that it's our job to continue to document this, and probably chances are by Friday the city will look completely different again. And so this is a very small window of something that represents something much bigger, the division of this country, which continues.
That's right. Like, Ron, I'm with you on that. Like, as difficult as coverage is without access to the various perimeters as you get closer and closer to the Capitol. Even the images of National Guardsmen armed on the streets of Washington, D.C. are like somewhat astonishing to see by themselves. Like, and I fully recognize like the historical importance of making those images, you know, again, with as much context as we can at this time. Like I keep pulling back and seeing that and just being astonished. Like last night I was coming back from dinner to the hotel that I'm staying at, and a block south, there was like 350, 400 soldiers checking into a hotel, which I photographed. But seeing that was like I feel like my jaw just keeps hitting the ground. And so I think even though it is not very straightforward to photograph this, and it seems like it would be, like it sounds like there's military crawling on all the streets, it's not that way. And it's not very easy to make a straightforward picture, like a picture of a soldier in front of the Capitol, for example. But that said, I think anything that we can make in this has vital historical importance as part of documentation of this very peculiar time.
I think it's important to just add this one thing. I think it's really incredibly important that the visuals here, however interesting they are, it is the context, it is the caption that takes it to another level. Ash and I were at the Capitol in Pennsylvania yesterday, National Guard protecting the Capitol. They are defending the Capitol against a possible attack from militias or whoever to disrupt an election. Put that in your head. They're defending the US Capitol against attack, not from a foreign invader, but from some American group. That is unique, and we are in a very strange place.
Oh yeah, I mean, Gianna, I don't know if you have the chance, just before Chris lines up his thing, image number 40, you know, the photograph, Ash photographed this scene too, but this image of police, number 40, the one before that, the police coming out. In any other context, you know, these guys would be projecting authority, would be projecting power, and here this is actually an image of humiliation, which for me is just it's absolutely extraordinary. Christopher, could you just share briefly? We know that you hopped in your car, you drove for 15, 16 hours overnight from Florida to go and shoot something called LiDAR, which I never heard of until you did it. But you know, you've made some extraordinary photographs in the hours and days that have followed January the 6th. Could you just share a little bit about that and show us what you've been doing, and then we'll ask some of the questions from the audience.
Yeah, it's I've heard of LiDAR drones and all that kind of stuff. I never really paid much attention to it. Christmas, I'm looking for Chrome. I'm going to show Christmas morning. I got an iPhone, trying to figure out what it was, this LiDAR thing. Understood that it's not a camera. It is not a camera. All it is it shoots out rays of laser that take digital measurements. When I discovered what I could do with around my Christmas tree, it just was happed around that. So for me, it's just a progression. It's a progression, like I said before, the magic of trying to capture a scene. But if I play here, it's like, okay, this is just in the, so this is the breach door. This is the east side that they went through, but you can turn on the measurements. So basically you have to walk around with your iPhone and you scan. It's like scanning the document. So, and what's really fascinating, and I realized so that it's actually, because when you use photography, the minute you put on a 28 or even a 70 millimeter, you're not kind of seeing reality with the human eye. So whatever we do with photography, there is always some kind of like optical manipulation. What I became fascinated with this is the reality of measurements. So if you watch this, what it is this is just me moving the object. So basically you do a scan, it's super low res, and then you can change the pixel dimension. So once I have it in a laptop, I'll be able to do high res. But it's interesting if you watch here, and I hadn't shown this before. So everywhere you see, I've had to paint. You have to paint with the phone. So in a sense, it's a creation. This is a one of a kind. It can't be replicated. And if you see if the agents move. So here you'll see, you get the scale. So that's, I meant 13 meters across is 6.6. So it's quite interesting. So I'll go different things, you know, it's fascinating. So it's like even here, troops on the street. And I realize wherever there's no data, wherever it's these empty holes, that's where the scanner doesn't pick up. It's like here, this Martin Luther King, this isn't all very appropriate for today. It wouldn't scan his face. For some reason, it wouldn't scan his face. Now you don't realize it. I'm not. So to me, it's just another form of anthropology. It's another form of documentation. It's available to everybody. That's what's just so mind-boggling. It's not as easy as it looks, because you have to move around and paint, and if you accidentally get your feet, you'll have a piece of tennis shoes in the frame. So yeah, it's just another way of storytelling, and I call the series Fractured Democracy because it has this kind of like feel. But what's interesting is here, it's like when you have this is just last night at the park where he went to the church and he held the Bible. So it's interesting how you move around this space. It's basically utilizing technology. That's it, pretty much. I want to show kind of where the measurements come in because I think that's interesting. So that's
sort of reminds me a little bit of.
Everybody out there, it's like some people like to go back and shoot film. To me, it's just a new way of capturing our society. Like I said, I've always had a love of photography, and then it's really weird. It's like this one. So you see the cross. I'm painting the cross. I know. I draw the line. I do tests. For me to make this of the soldiers in the Capitol, I have to walk. You can kind of see right here is me, my feet. But I had to walk through these soldiers, make a very long scan, walk over here, walk over there, and then boom, then you hit process. And what the heck? And what's interesting, it's all down to the centimeter accurate. So why not use it? The future of photography is just going to be off the charts with the technology. That's it.
Reminds me a little bit of forensic archaeology. Thank you, Chris. Yeah. That's fantastic. I want to get to a few questions here. So I've got one here from Linda Robbins. So recognizing that many of these photographs will become the iconic images that will define that day in history, what do you want people to see? So Ash, can you have a stab at that one?
I hope that I hope that all of these images represent what all of us regard our jobs as, which is to record and then present and archive all of these situations that we saw in the most honest and the most objective way that we possibly can. As images that were created with integrity and that represent truth of that day. I think that's that's the basis of what all of us do at this agency as photographers. It should also be recognized that all of the images that the four of us created here are by no means a thorough recollection of that day. We all missed pictures, and this is the thing, like all four of us missed the picture of the chamber. And between us, we got a lot, but by no means did we get all of it.
Yeah. That's very important. What you don't photograph is often as important as what you do, right? The question here about advice for young is from a gentleman who teaches photography in the United Kingdom. And he's asking, any advice for young photographers? So Christopher Lee, you are one of them, and you did an exceptional job that day. So could you tell us what advice you would have for any young photographers who are sort of trying to enter into this kind of chaos, into this situation, which might start off being fairly benign, but develops into something, very, very complex?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a tough one. That's kind of a tough one to answer because I think everyone comes into their own in various different ways. I think that the one thing that I always you know, whenever anyone asks me like, oh, how did you get into this, or how do you prepare for this? The problem is that there's not one or two ways to do it. There's infinite ways of how to do it. I think that the thing that helped me the most was before I ever even thought about going to Washington D.C. It's just I was already, you know, kind of thinking about how I wanted my work to look like. In what context do I want the people or the things in my pictures to be in, and what kind of intentions do I have for it? And so if you're constantly and almost obsessively thinking about those kinds of things about your pictures, then you're kind of subconsciously train your body and your mind to kind of recognize that and shoot in that way, regardless of how hectic the situation is. And another thing that really helped me was just concentrating on situational awareness. You know, like I learned a lot from you and everyone else around me, Ash, Ron, Chris. But the thing that I guess you kind of have to like pick up yourself and just kind of constantly practice in your mind is just being aware of what's going on around you, and know to trust your gut to say, okay, I'm safe here, or I'm relatively safe enough to be here, or I need to get the hell out. Because yeah, you can train someone to do that, but you kind of have to like be thinking about that on your own. And I think that was the thing, if anything, that really kind of helped all of us on that day.
That's actually, Chris, like I think what you say is like one of the most key things is like knowing when you're comfortable to stay and when you're comfortable, like when you think it's time to leave. And Ron and I were talking about this last night, that when things like this happen on home turf, it's a little bit different. You know, like we're all trained conflict photographers. That automatically means that we have a much higher level of risk tolerance than average people, and a much higher capacity to deal with difficult situations that are taking place in front of us. That's like, it's ingrained in our DNA in some ways. So when these things happen and you're working at home, if you're based in the UK, if you're based in Australia, if you're based in Uganda, it doesn't matter. If you feel like covering difficult situations like this that can be at times like pretty scary, you will know very quickly if you are interested in doing that. And if you don't feel like you can do it, you should get the hell out, because there will be other people who can do it. And it's probably better that you're not going to live the next 20 years of your life traumatized by an event that you went to that you weren't prepared for. There are people who are cut out for this, and there are people who are not cut out for this. And there's room for all of us to make pictures and document stuff like events around this.
One of the things that we've already alluded to that I'm struck at just looking at this screen, you know, we have these different generations of photographer at VII here. So you Christopher, who has been working through the 1980s, as I mentioned in the intro, mentored Ron. Ron's career, Ron's first journey overseas to photograph Panama, where he made those very famous photographs there of the vice president or the presidential candidate being attacked. And in Bosnia, you know, Christopher was mentoring Ron and helping Ron. And I know that Ashley here has been mentoring Christopher for years. I was mentored by Tim Page, Gilles Perez, Philip Jones Griffiths. Those, without that generosity, without, you know, that transfer of knowledge, I don't think I would have made anything of my career. And I think you know, that's an essential part of the learning process, if you can find access to somebody who's been there before you. We have a lot of questions about gear. I won't go into them all, but just maybe Ron, if you could talk a little bit. Is this sort of situation where you pack a lot of gear for every event, you travel light? And then there's a question here, 3 questions about the choice between color and black and white. So why do all of you make those choices? Ron, if you could answer both of those, would be great.
Gear actually is a very important thing in covering these situations. The way you dress, obviously Chris has referenced it, incredibly important when dealing with the protest side. Trying to be low key, inconspicuous, be able to move through crowds. So I'm using Fujifilm mirrorless cameras, very small, not like with giant lenses. So often the protesters think of the kind of cliche version of the press photographer. So trying not to look like that is important. Having protection for, we all have, aside from our K95s, if real tear gas is being used, we have gas masks, and we have things to deal with if you get tear gassed, different kind of material, saline solution, eye protection, eye wash, all these things you should be always carrying when dealing in these situations. But it's important to be very nimble and be very careful. And in terms of black and white or color, I think each of us sees the story in his or her own way. For myself, even though the client I was working for the New Republic wanted to use the work in color, I saw it more as a black and white story. So I decided to use black and white for my representation of the story. But it's the way everybody feels about their work and how it relates to their voice.
Another group of questions here about just process orientated for other photographers out there. So to what extent are you in conversation with each other as you're moving around and operating during the day? We've touched on that a little bit. I know Chris Lee and Ash, you were on a WhatsApp group, but are you isolated? Are you working in pairs? I know in covering wars, mostly we would try and work in pairs. But on this day, it seems that you guys were working in isolation for some of it, certainly Christopher Morris. Who'd like to have a crack at that? Christopher, why don't you? I know today, on the January 6th, you were working alone, but generally speaking, do you work with others?
Usually in conflict, I always want to be with somebody else. I want to be with somebody else for several reasons, mainly if you're hurt. You've got somebody there to kind of help get you out. In extreme conflicts, it's also, there's just different factors. I had no problem. That day I wanted to be alone because I knew there were packs of journalists. It's just a personal decision. Also in my mind, you had the interior, the photographers that were on the inside. There were a lot that were accredited that worked there. So in my mind, the inside is cover, and it's Ashley where he made that decision. Do I go through the window? And then I'm going to miss all I kept seeing is I just couldn't believe that people, I was waiting for somebody to appear on top of the dome with a big Trump 2020. There's stairs. I know I know the stairwell that can lead you to the top of the dome. You can get out there, just like at one point. So, but having, you definitely need to be in contact with somebody. And if it's a big spot news story, you should have somebody, even if it's a family monitor, that is watching the news or listening to the radio that can direct you. If you don't have any guidance, your tunnel vision, you do not know what's happening in your 30, 100-meter sphere of vision.
That's I mean,
the whole scaffolding on the front side could have come down and killed everybody, and I wouldn't know about it on the back side.
Right, but there's also a good chance you never would have known about it because there were so many people there. Getting a signal to have a conversation or even sending a text was incredibly difficult. It was a very rare.
I never touched my phone to look at anything on it. I was just too overwhelmed. I had problems just getting the GPS to get me up to the Supreme Court. The GPS kept going out. The screen on my GPS would go black. It was very strange.
My editor was actually looking very closely at events as they were taking place, and she was sending me messages as things were happening. Like as the pictures started coming out of the chamber, moments after the photographers were taking them, I was finding out that was happening. So I was honestly like looking but I had never been in the Capitol before. I had no idea how to get to the chamber. Like
it's a labyrinth.
Right. So I had really good comms, and occasionally I would see photographers inside the Capitol, but the last 45 minutes, I didn't see anybody. And now, like looking at this slideshow today, I realized that Chris and Ron, you must have been upstairs in the offices while I was downstairs in the rotunda, and they were pushing to get into the chamber. I mean, like this whole thing is not like things happen 20 feet away from me, and I have no idea until I see the picture.
The chamber is just off to the left, down the hall from the rotunda.
Right.
It's just go down the hallway, you know.
All right, Chris, that's a little late. Thank you
30
for that.
minutes.
Yeah.
I know.
Good. There's a cluster of questions here, guys, about there's a funny one here from somebody who says he's asking for a friend about how those of us in our 50s and 60s manage all this. But I won't ask you that. But what I would ask, Christopher, you've alluded to this, you know, PTSD and sort of processing all of this stuff. So, you know, last week, you know, big event, enormous event, violence. You guys are all in the middle of it. That's last week. This week, you're all, you know, moving on to the next thing. How do you process this stuff, and to what extent do you work with each other to do that, if at all? Ron.
What? The question was for Chris.
I'm going to ask you.
I'm
So it's just
I'm very solitary. Everybody knows that. Ron?
Yeah. So how do you process this emotionally? Because it's you know, you're constantly moving from one story to another. So for a lot of the world, they look at an event, you know, last week. It's an enormous event. It takes weeks to sort of process that, to investigate that, to think about it, to imagine it, to reimagine it. And largely through, you know, reading the press and looking at news and talking to friends. You guys are off there ready for the next installment. And, you know, emotionally, there is a price to pay for this stuff. So we have a number of questions here from people just wondering, you know, how you do that. And I'm wondering, to what extent is friendship important?
Yeah, I don't want to be cavalier about it. But this is a very sort of vague, broad answer, but we can dive into it maybe offline if people are interested. But basically, these experiences for me become part of me and who I am, and will then affect the next decisions. It will affect the way that I'm working this week, and will affect the way that I see things, and will continue to, whether it's tomorrow, a year from now, or 10 years from now. And it's been like that ever since the beginning. And I think, you know, you have to understand how to acclimate yourself within these own experiences in order to be able to continue working. And if you're unable to do that, then this job is certainly is not the type of career that one should have.
Yeah, guys, we were supposed to end at 11:15. We've overrun. It's been fascinating, and I know you guys have to go off and do work to the next thing. But is there anything that you would like to say?
Gary, I wanted to kind of, if it's possible, I wanted to kind of add to what your question to Ron and Ron's answer as well.
Yep.
The thing that I kind of had a bit of, I guess, like a reckoning with is that I think you know, all of us have worked worked extensively in other countries where our lives have been in danger in one way or another, but at the end of the day, you know, we still have a passport to get out and to leave that danger whenever we see fit, you know. I think what we experience is a very rare occurrence where we got to have a small taste of what it was like to have to be in a situation and feel what our colleagues in, let's say, Iraq or Afghanistan face on a daily basis if you are native to that area. And I think that was, for me, that was really eye-opening. It's something that I think like we maybe as an industry might take for granted a lot of times, especially as Americans or Europeans. And it's because like whenever we leave a story, we don't have the threat of, let's say, a neighbor, you know, being present. I live in Texas, and I'm very much, you know, kind of coming to terms with the fact that, yeah, the guy that I talked to at the post office or at or pumping the gas is will, you know, there's a very real chance that he or she was there wishing death upon, you know, me or like one of my colleagues. And I think that we got a little taste of that, of what a lot of our colleagues face, you know, around the world.
Thank you, Chris. That was very, very beautifully expressed. Christopher, Ash, Ron, any closing comments before we before I say goodbye to everybody? Got a few words I'd like to add.
I find it much harder. It was much easier for me dealing with all the foreign thing. This thing is touching me very personal. I had all my relatives on my mother's side are rabid Trump supporters, and I text my mom. It's like, how can you you raised me as a boy and a child to not be like that man? How can you basically worship a man that was everything that you taught me as a child? And I texted her that day, that the 6th after, and I texted her, your people tried to kill me because I am the enemy of the people. You know, so, yeah.
Thank you, Christopher.
Okay. Yeah. It's a different story for me being an American, you know, so.
Absolutely.
It's like, what the heck, crazy times, I like to say. Sorry, I get emotional, but thinking about my family, that's hard. It's been 4
Good to be
years,
emotional.
4 years of detachment and understanding, questioning how, you know. But I know how, because I saw it in Yugoslavia, you saw it in all the countries. It's basically allowing politicians to spin hatred of others. I hate you. It's the blacks are taking something away, the gays and lesbians. Oh my God, I'm gonna have to serve a cake to a gay couple. It's a hatred of others, whatever color that may be. And that's what politicians utilize. And basically, he spent the last 5 years whipping the nation into hatred. And that's where we are.
I think if it's okay.
One thing that I've set out in my entire career as a photographer to, and I think I can speak for all of us here, is we've all tried to personalize and humanize who the various players are on each side of this hatred. And I think that things at home now have maybe never been more difficult, particularly for the Americans in this group. But this what happened last Wednesday is the best example we could possibly have, that we need to work harder now than we ever have before, and like keep at this, you know, like stay in this fight as photographers. Try to hold on to the empathy that we've worked with throughout our entire careers and keep working.
Thank you, Ash. Seven will be there for sure. Ron, last word for you before I close things down. I've got a couple of important things I want to say to everybody before we go.
Just to kind of reemphasize the fact that I think that this what's happened over the last 4 years, culminating in January 6th, shows the value not only of photojournalism but all of journalism, and that you, the audience, is incredibly important for you not to be passive receivers of the news, but to be active and to go and look and read and watch and understand as much as you can to be better educated citizens. Don't let our work stop. Take it to the next place and make things better with it.
Thank you, guys. A big thank you from me to all of you. I'm immensely proud actually to be your colleague and to be here today. I think you just did an incredible job. Thank you very much for that. There will be a follow-up conversation where we don't know what's going to happen over the next few days, but there will be another conversation about political photography in the United States coming up shortly. And what we've decided to do at the Seven Foundation and Seven Academy is print a limited edition newspaper zine using the work of Chris, Christopher, Ash, Ron, and some other text essays that will be available for free to any subscribers, premium subscribers, premium insiders to our program. So I urge you all, please, if this conversation was interesting to you, please sign up for our premium subscriber service. We've been operating this for a year for free. We're now trying to enhance it, and please tell your friends, share the word, and sign up. Those of you otherwise will be able to buy that journal through the Seven store. So we've got coming up the second part of a conversation with two curators, Hilary Roberts and Alison Nordstrom. And then next Tuesday, Ron's back on air with Marcel Saba talking about the work of a photo agency. So thank you, everybody, for being with us today. Thank you most of all to Christopher, Chris, Ash, Ron, and Gianna and Fiona, who are managing the background. Thank you very much.